What is good, Tech Gang? These gaming tech news roundups are getting longer, but I can't help it. There is a lot of exciting news this week. An enterprising hobbyist developer started the work of making Lossless Scaling playable on Linux. That is insane. Digital Foundry finally released their first Steam Deck OLED versus Switch 2 video, and there is some fascinating information in that one. I also learned about a new secret Steam Deck feature. There's a new Steam Deck update. A hard-to-find game has been finally dumped, and honestly, there is so much more news. So what am I waiting for? Let's get into it. Lossless Scaling is an incredibly popular gaming application on Windows. It's sold on Steam for $6.99 and sometimes lower, and despite the name, the reason it's so popular is not because of its upscaling capabilities. It is able to do upscaling, but that typically looks worse than most in-game solutions, including FSR2, which exists in virtually any modern game. Even many emulators have their own scaling features that are more suited to the task than lossless scaling. No, the reason lossless scaling is so popular is because of its frame generation features. The frame gen here is not as good as DLSS or FSR3. Instead, it's closer to AMD Fluid Motion frames or NVIDIA's Smooth Motion. LS's frame gen has an adaptive mode that many people really like because it aims to even out variable frame rates by generating frames that fill in the gaps. This can improve perceived smoothness, especially if the base frame rate is already high. The whole thing is a post-processing solution that works on the final output of the game, therefore it lacks the in-game motion data, but even though there are better solutions out there, lossless scaling remains so popular simply because it has universal compatibility. You don't have to think about what graphics card you have or what APIs the game support. You can just use lossless scaling frame gen on any game to try to get a smoother experience. Although it's not something that has ever appealed to me personally, I can definitely see why it's gotten so popular. As a result, it's something that a lot of people have been clamoring for on the Steam Deck, not to mention Linux more generally. You can find Reddit threads asking for support, and YouTube has been recommending that I make a video on the subject for months, indicating that a lot of people are searching for Steam Deck lossless scaling content. But there has been no reason to make such a video other than to say it is not supported and there are no known plans for it to be supported. That is until this week's story of one developer enduring what he called psychological torture in order to port lossless scaling frame gen to Linux. This project is called Let's Go Vikings. I mean, it's called LSFGVK, and it's a new in-development open source project that does just what I said. It brings lossless scaling's frame generation feature to Linux. Although the project is still in relatively early stages, the developer's journey to port this so far is fascinating. Apparently, he analyzed the lossless DLL file to understand how LS works. Lossless scaling uses D3D11, and as many of you know, DXVK is a translation layer that pretends to be D3D11 in a Windows environment, but under the hood is turning D3D11 API calls into Vulkan API calls. So the developer used DXVK first to just get lossless scaling up and running on Linux at all, and this was a crucial first step towards verifying that this project could actually work. But the process of intercepting the full rendering pipeline as LS does is much more complex than what DXVK was made for, and so the developer had to reverse engineer and rebuild the entire D3D11 pipeline in C++ on Linux, matching it precisely to LS's original behavior. For now, the process of installing and running this is extremely manual and requires that you are pretty comfortable with Linux, not to mention that you have a copy of Lossless Scaling on Steam. Here are some instructions from a few days ago, and you can see that it requires doing the compilation yourself. Moreover, this is still a very new project. The README states that FrameGen works in quite a few games, but there are compatibility issues in many other games, as well as frame pacing issues that still need to be fixed. The developer is actively fixing bugs and improving it regularly, but his hope is that more Linux developers will contribute to the project to improve the installation process and overall experience. As for Steam Deck compatibility, someone theoretically should be able to get this up and running, but as of writing, I haven't seen it yet. I did see one Redditor that tried and ended up having problems with CMake. It might be a better idea for someone to try to get this up and running on Bazzite first before attempting to do this in SteamOS, which, as the Redditor points out, is more locked down than the average Arch distro. There's also the question of whether or not this is viable for the Steam Deck in the first place. Personally, I'm not a user of lossless scaling, but as I mentioned at the top, this is something that a lot of people have been clamoring for, and believe it or not, I ran into a user that said that they're running Windows on Steam Deck just for lossless scaling. Aside from the Steam Deck, however, this is a watershed moment and could feasibly be a reason to look forward toward the Steam Deck 2 as LSFGVK continues to improve compatibility of lossless scaling on Linux. Let me know what you think, and I'll be sure to keep you updated on this story. So it seems like the in-depth comparisons between Steam Deck OLED and Switch 2 are really starting to come in now, and man, this is really fun to see. In my last video, I went over some new data published by the Fox on his YouTube channel where he compared those two handhelds using No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk 2077. Since then, we've gotten a new video from Digital Foundry where they use Cyberpunk 2077 to compare the Steam Deck OLED and the Switch 2 for the first time on their channel, and it is yet another amazing video. Unlike Kerry, Digital Foundry's piece emphasizes Switch 2 performance when docked. We knew that the Switch 2 when docked is well ahead of what the Steam Deck OLED can do, and here we really get to see that breakdown in full detail. Firstly, they note something that we all know, but it is important to point out nonetheless. The Switch 2 version of Cyberpunk 2077 is a custom-built game. It uses a direct-to-metal graphics API and comes with custom modifications to best suit the hardware it's on. Although CD Projekt Red did end up making a distinct graphical preset for the Steam Deck, it is ultimately still just the PC version being played on the deck. So although a true apples to apples comparison may not be fully possible, DF, just like Kerry, are simply finding the closest comparison points that they can. To that end, the Fox and Digital Foundry agree on a few key points. The first key point that both videos agree on is that the Switch 2 simply has phenomenal power efficiency. Even when docked, the Switch 2 is drawing less than 17 watts from the wall, whereas the Steam Deck is going to be operating at above 20 watts total system power if we want any reasonable performance for this title. Digital Foundry's video also confirmed that you're going to get about 2 hours of battery life in demanding titles in real-world usage. It's fascinating to imagine what it would be like if the Switch 2 had a 50 watt-hour battery like the Steam Deck OLED does, because that would mean 5 hours of battery life on Cyberpunk 2077, which is just insane to think about. Finally, both videos point out how much better DLSS is than any of the upscaling tech that's available on the Steam Deck. Digital Foundry used both FSR and XeSS as a comparison point, but obviously neither of those could keep up with DLSS on the Switch 2. Where Digital Foundry's analysis differed from Kerry's is that DF focused on docked gaming for the Switch 2, and it genuinely shows how much room there is for improvement for, say, a Steam Deck 2 when it comes to the high end. Let me explain. So Digital Foundry went super in depth on the different settings available on PC and found which of those options match up to the Switch 2 when in handheld mode and in docked mode. So elements like crowd density, volumetric fog, local shadow mesh quality, etc. And although Steam Deck OLED beats many of those options for Switch 2 in handheld mode, Switch 2 in docked mode gains the advantage on graphical settings. But it's not just settings. Digital Foundry also placed additional emphasis on frame pacing and showed that the Switch 2 achieves a remarkably smooth locked 30 FPS, whereas the upscaling they used on the Steam Deck OLED had more overhead than expected, causing it to have inconsistent frame pacing when trying to reach that 30 FPS cap. Likewise, DF used dynamic resolution scaling to match what the Switch 2 was doing, and here we see another area where the Switch 2 pulls ahead with the DRS window being narrower and the resolution on average being higher than that of the Steam Deck. Digital Foundry's analysis complements Kerry's excellent work, and it reveals the underlying optimizations that allow the Switch 2 to achieve impressive efficiency and performance in Cyberpunk 2077. It's not just about raw silicon power, but instead about highly customized software, intelligent visual compromises, and superior upscaling technology working in concert. Although the Steam Deck OLED can outclass the Switch 2 in handheld mode, it shows that there is still room for improvement in a dock mode when we finally get to a Steam Deck 2. So I've been making Steam Deck videos for almost 4 years now, and I still get regularly surprised by some of the things that the Steam Deck can do, and I have to say that this is one I should have known, but I just somehow never even considered it. Definitely let me know in the comments if you knew about this one. So I saw this secret feature posted on Resetera, and I had to share it here with you guys. Basically, the OP was talking about how his favorite secret feature of the Steam Deck is that you can pair your phone with it over Bluetooth so that you can listen to music, podcasts, or audiobooks on it while you're playing a game. And yeah, would you believe it? It works. On the Steam Deck, just navigate to the main Bluetooth settings page, not the quick access menu's Bluetooth shortcut. From here, make sure you have show all devices enabled, then go to your phone's Bluetooth connection page as well. Your phone should appear in the Steam Deck's list of available to pair Bluetooth devices and select to connect. Once you have it all connected, you can use wired or even wireless headphones, and the game audio coming from your Steam Deck will be mixed with the audio streaming from your phone. For the audio coming from your phone, you can turn that up or down using your phone. Raising the Steam Deck volume is just going to raise the audio, whether it's coming from your phone or from a game or even from SteamOS. The rest of the thread included other people sharing their own useful Steam Deck tips, and that was fun too. Someone mentioned that they added a browser as a non-Steam game app so that they can go into game mode and play a YouTube video in the background while they are playing games. I'm sure many of us have done that one. Someone also mentioned that Decky Loader has a picture-in-picture plugin, and that makes that feature even more convenient. Some people talked about having specific SD cards for genres or categories like JRPGs or indies and kind of using that like game cartridges. I've done that before and it's also pretty fun if you ask me. Then someone mentioned KDE Connect, and that actually comes up very often in the comments of this channel. KDE Connect is pretty cool because you can download the app to your phone or PC and use that to connect to the deck. And all of a sudden you can receive phone notifications on your Steam Deck. You can share files, you can share the clipboard, and you can just use that app as a remote desktop to your Steam Deck. Valve has another update to SteamOS. This time we're talking about 3.7.14 on the beta channel, and there's only one bullet point in the patch notes, but it is a promising one. Here they say that they re-enabled experimental Wake on Bluetooth support for Steam Deck LCD, including support for LE peripherals. Wake on Bluetooth was a feature that debuted on the Steam Deck OLED when that was originally released, and then Valve found a way to enable it for the Steam Deck LCD. Unfortunately, some people were reporting that LCD models would sometimes wake up erroneously, and so finally, Valve disabled support for this feature in the latest stable update, SteamOS 3.7.13. Now it's back in the beta channel, but I wouldn't consider us out of the woods yet. At least one commenter in the Steam forum said that they still experienced an erroneous wake on their LCD deck after the update, but they also said it may be due to the controller itself specifically because the controller does not turn off by itself and ends up waking the deck back up as it is looking for a device to pair to. Hopefully, Valve keeps a close eye on this and is able to stomp out the bugs before it comes back to stable. Bazite just published an update blog post for July, and it is a big one with some important details. The biggest one of all is Bazaar. Bazaar is the new default Flatpak store for Universal Blue, which Bazite is built on. It's a brand new store with the core objective being to encourage developers to ship and maintain their applications for Linux themselves. By focusing purely on Flatpaks for its new app store, Bazite is emphasizing a more modern, consistent, and potentially more stable way to manage applications, as it does avoid the complexities that sometimes do arise from traditional package manager because those typically have system-wide dependencies. Bazaar also allows distributions and images to curate the recommended applications. So for example, with Bazite, the store contains recommendations for the best gaming apps like Heroic, GZ Doom, and RetroDeck. It also features prominent donation links to encourage you to support your favorite creators, which can help those creators continue to support those or future applications. In this blog post, the Bazite devs also gave a huge adoption update, and I really didn't expect this. Bazite now shows up in the Steam survey. If you filter the June hardware survey to Linux only, you'll see that Bazite 42 has 2.37% share of all Linux users, and that is honestly incredible. Bazite is a distro that is about 2.5 years old, so it's kind of insane to see it already in the Steam hardware survey, and I do have to say that is incredibly well deserved. Likewise, the project has also just crossed 20,000 active weekly users, so clearly a lot of people are using Bazite regularly. An interesting detail about the community in the blog post is that Fedora was planning to drop support for 32-bit libraries in the long-term future, but they ended up rescinding that proposal thanks to pushback from the gaming open source community. The blog post says we were able to communicate that dropping 32-bit libraries currently would harm gaming in the broader Fedora ecosystem during a pivotal moment driving Linux adoption. Moving forward, some members of the Bazite team will be more active in Fedora conversations, particularly in a proposed gaming SIG to better represent gamers and gaming under Fedora as a whole, and hopefully prevent future avoidable PR disasters. This is a huge win and great to see stuff like this happening behind the scenes. Finally, the blog post details that there is now full support for the Asus ROG Z13 2025 and the One X Player X1 Mini Pro. I believe I own the latter, so let me know if you'd like to see me try Bazite on that. They also updated the Linux kernel to version 6.15.4 and improved Wi-Fi service by doing things like addressing an issue where it would do periodic Wi-Fi scanning, resulting in freezes during game streaming. An absolutely incredible update from the folks over at Bazite. Big congrats to them for their continued adoption. Certainly it's become my personal favorite gaming OS at this point. Non-Steam launchers recently received an update to version 4.2.2 that adds real-time shortcuts. Non-Steam launchers, of course, is the application or perhaps script that makes it easy for you to add third-party launchers to Steam. You just select what you want from the UI and it adds the apps to Steam for you automatically, including box art. Usually when you use it, you have to restart Steam for the changes to take place. However, with this new update that adds real-time shortcuts, the developers must have found a way to force Steam to refresh the library without a restart. That is a pretty neat development, and I wonder if something can be done similarly for Steam ROM Manager, which is used by EmuDeck. Simultaneously, the developer also teased full Steam integration, which would allow you to launch NSL directly from Steam while using a controller in game mode. If it works out, this would mean that you would be able to add new launchers, install games, and configure the compatibility mode, all without ever needing to switch to desktop mode. Sign me up. In a significant development for Linux and Steam Deck gamers, Embark Studios has committed to continuing support for their popular title, The Finals, despite the implementation of a kernel-level anti-cheat. This is particularly noteworthy as kernel-level anti-cheat solutions often lead to a lack of compatibility with Linux-based operating systems, including SteamOS on the Steam Deck. They shared a post on their Discord that read there are no plans to drop support for SteamOS/Proton/Wine and/or Steam Deck, despite us not officially supporting the platform. We will do our utmost best to maintain your ability to play. Another developer added that they're working closely with Code Weavers, the developers behind Proton, who are QAing every release that they've put out since about Season 5. The dev added that it's not exactly a collaboration, but that they get to catch issues with Steam Deck early because Code Weavers will at the very least do a pass on the game before the patch gets released. As to why they're supporting Linux, they say it's not our primary platform, but we understand that there is a pretty passionate and growing player base on Steam Deck. No kidding. Please keep reporting issues here to our support or report them to the Proton devs directly, and we will investigate what we can do to fix things. So this represents what feels like a shifting mindset among live service game developers. Although there are plenty of games with anti-cheat that are still not compatible with SteamOS and Linux, more and more newer live service games are taking Steam Deck into account, like Marvel Rivals, Mecha Break, and now The Finals. Truly an amazing trend for the platform. Likewise, palworld is now Steam Deck verified and SteamOS compatible as of this week, just as they're launching their Tides of Terraria crossover update. This game's compatibility rating has fluctuated between unsupported and playable. GamingOnLinux.com even has a list of some of the problems that previously showed up, like needing to bring up the on-screen keyboard manually or small in-game text that was difficult to read. But it appears that most of those issues have now been resolved, resulting in a better Steam Deck rating. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4 released to Steam this week and maintains the excellent core skateboarding mechanics, tight controls, and addictive game loop. There are even a few new levels like Water Park and Movie Studios. There are a few changes that fans of the originals are disappointed by, with less than 20% of the new soundtrack being made from songs of the original games, and maybe more importantly, with THPS 4 going from a free skating format to the 2-minute runs of the initial trilogy. Still though, some people are pleased with this title. It is considered playable on the Steam Deck. Personally, it's a little rich for my blood at $50 at launch, so I'll probably wait for a sale, but for those of you that have Game Pass, you can play this on Battle.net on Steam Deck natively. So this is one of the rare games that you can play on Steam Deck via Game Pass thanks to the Battle.net launcher. Check it out. On the subject of stoking nostalgia, Patapon 1+2 Replay also hit Steam. Originally released for the PSP in 2007 and 2008, this remaster improves on those versions with upgraded graphics, new difficulty modes, some timing adjustments, and a constant drum display. This game is rated playable on deck, saying that it sometimes does show mouse, keyboard, or non-Steam Deck controller icons. Not bad if you ask me. mycopunk came to early access and is already being held as the best co-op PvE shooter since Helldivers 2 and Deep Rock Galactica. It has a distinctive cel-shaded style with impressive gunplay and actually meaningful weapon upgrades. The developers have explicitly stated that they're optimizing for the Steam Deck and that we can expect a solid 30 FPS with adjusted settings. If you like co-op shooters and unique art styles, definitely keep an eye out for this one. If you like cozy games, Islanders New Shores should be high up on your wish list. It's a chill, minimalist city builder puzzle game. You can place buildings strategically for high scores on beautiful, procedurally generated islands. It's a sequel to the original Islanders, and it has more buildings, new biomes, and fun new boons that basically alter the rules of gameplay, like one that allows you to place 2 identical buildings next to each other without picking up any negative points. This one is verified and capable of 60 FPS on high settings, so if you want something relaxing and pretty to look at, definitely check this one out. Limited Run Games sent a prototype of their new Doom for Super Nintendo along with a Super Nintendo rumbling controller to the YouTube channel Video Game Esoterica. The reviewer, typically critical of Limited Run Games' past quality issues like using CDRs for a 3DO game and using recycled chips for a Game Boy Advance game, did acknowledge a potential shift in their quality control with this one. This new Doom Super Nintendo cartridge is pretty cool. It features a badass red and blue design that looks like Cacodemon colors and a high quality PCB that was designed in collaboration with Bitmap Bureau, known for their excellent homebrew games. One source of controversy is that this PCB has an integrated Raspberry Pi RP2350B chip integrated onto it. This acts as the Super FX3 chip, a spiritual successor to the popular Super FX chip used in some original SNES games. The developer that worked on the original 1995 SNES port of Doom, Randall Linden, clarified that the Raspberry Pi here emulates the Super FX hardware, registers, memory map, and graphics logic using custom firmware. It acts as a graphics coprocessor similar to how the original Super FX chip worked, and it does not run the entire game on the Raspberry Pi, as some people did initially believe. The goal here was to create a more powerful version of the Super FX chip that could have theoretically existed in the SNES era, but using modern, affordable hardware. The game comes with significant performance improvements and aims to deliver the complete original Doom experience on the Super Nintendo at a much faster frame rate, nearly double that of the original. This looks really neat, so absolutely check out Video Game Esoterica's review for even more information. And here's an interesting one. Paprium is now fully playable via emulators after a massive reverse engineering effort. Paprium was a homebrew beat-em-up game that began development for the Sega Genesis back in 2012. It raised over $1 million on its Kickstarter campaign, but many customers who pre-ordered never received their physical copies, and the developers never made a digital copy available. The few lucky backers who did receive a physical cartridge found out that it relied heavily on a custom chipset with a very strong form of hardware-based protection, making it incredibly difficult to dump. Then, just recently, the YouTube channel Video Game Esoterica reported that the game was finally dumped. This was thanks to a massive collaborative reverse engineering project that involved complex techniques like voltage glitching the cartridge to bypass its security measures. In any case, you can now download the contents and play them in your favorite Mega Drive emulator. Enjoy! Alright, that's going to do it for this week, folks. Definitely let me know what you think about this week's news. I hope you had a good time. I hope you're having a great week. Tech Gang out. Goodbye!